Today's guest on A Life and a Living is Michelle Natalya Moore. Who's a really, really fascinating lady who's had a fantastic career in some of the big four accounting and consulting firms and has worked globally as well. So has got a lot of experience. She set up a company called MindEQuity, and it's a business that really is focusing on harnessing the attention in the workplace. And I'm not going to give away too much about it, but it is absolutely fascinating where you actually treat attention as an asset in the business and how you are going to optimize that asset. So it really is a fascinating conversation. We also talk about how this whole issue about attention has been impacted about COVID and what leaders should be looking at in order to ensure that they are harnessing this asset that is, we all aware of, but perhaps we don't talk about it as often as we should. So Michelle Natalya Moore is just such an interesting lady, and you will really get so much from this. So please sit back and enjoy. Michelle, thank you so much indeed for joining me here today. I'm really thrilled to have you on the show, and I'm looking forward to this.
As am I, John. Greetings.
This will be fun. So you're the founder of an organization called MindEQuity. You might just explain a little bit about that, but also I wanted to contextualize it in the sense that prior to that, you have worked for some pretty major organizations at very senior level. You've been at kind of partner shareholder level in PwC and EY, and I'm just curious in the sense that when you're talking about MindEQuity, was your experience of working there, was that part of the kind of the drive to actually set up MindEQuity? So you might explain MindEQuity first and maybe answer the second question second.
Sure. Well, MindEQuity is a consulting firm that helps professional services teams focus better or do better work in half the time. And it was created in 2014. The brand was created. And there was this idea about how do we have a balance between what are we investing in terms of intelligence, using our minds for intelligence, versus how are we using the whole corpus or our whole bodies, both brains, left and right brain, and the brain that's in the skull and the brain that's in the body for wisdom. And so this idea of building equity in the mind appeared. I didn't do anything with it until literally during COVID. The idea emerged because of my multitasking habit, which was born in PricewaterhouseCoopers, right? When you're in a professional services organization, and this is, I'll date myself, but, when I was 25, I entered the firm, and I'm 54 now, and I was rewarded for multitasking back then. Yes. And I hired people based on, what are your multitasking skills? And of course, with the advent of the smartphone and the attention economy, this problem is eroding our prefrontal cortex. And in COVID, I noticed that this is just getting worse and worse and worse. Mm-hmm. So it was very easy sort of for me to identify a niche that I've always been working in, which is the intersection of the human and the machine, or the balance between the digital and the physical. How do we do technology-driven change, for example? So in all of those 15 years, in both Ernst & Young and in PricewaterhouseCoopers, working with change of humans do change, but this technology-driven change, tech was always bigger than the human. And I think that is now a problem. We are heads in screens all the time, and we have lost our connection with ourselves, with the corpus of the corporation, with the body of the corporation. If you look at a corporation holistically and think of it as a living, breathing entity, now we're all heads in screens. We're disembodied. We're losing the ability to tap into wisdom for innovation. We're losing the ability to empathize through screens, et cetera, et cetera. So I think the shift came also because when I left PwC, I had been working in Russia for 15 years and I moved to Canada. So I did a country shift. I did a culture shift.
Wow.
I created a new family, and thus my career began to evolve in a completely different way. I went from the corporate world to the social innovation space, and now MindEQuity. So
okay. And
lots of things
just
at the same time.
so just for clarity, and I know this might sound like a stupid question, but I'll ask it anyway, is what is your definition of attention?
Attention is a function of the body. It is the mechanism through which the brain directs its resources. It's akin to a respiratory system where you can compare it. I like the analogy of metabolism. Metabolism uses food to create energy. Attention is the mechanism by which the brain directs its resources. So that is my definition of attention. And people confuse it a lot with focus, right? Focus is actually simply a skill or a skill and an act of will to cause ourselves to be concentrated. It can be trained, but attention is much more complex. It's a function of many, many things and is influenced by our environment, by our state of being, the extent that we have body, mind, connection, and balance, etc.
And I'm assuming that we can develop our attention. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So what are the things that we can do?
Right?
Yeah. So what are the things that we can do to develop our attention skills?
So I'm going to say that develop is a great word for it, but I'm going to say protect and harness it to its maximum potential. So to reach a high human potential, I believe we need to treat attention like an asset that's as valuable as money. And how do we care for it, right? Develop it, care for it, and harness it. And based on my experience, being a knowledge worker my whole life and working exclusively with professional services firms and technology people, based on observation and research, I know that there are 5 things that influence our ability to protect and harness attention.
These are the 5 elements that you talk about.
These are the 5 elements, yeah. And these are also the 5 strengths, I think, of an energized team, a team that can innovate, a team that can sustain market advantage without sacrificing well-being. And so these 5 elements are about how we design work. And so what influences our ability to harness attention? It's focus, culture, balance, tools or technology, the obvious one, and our physical as well as virtual work environments.
So it's the physical and the work environment.
Yeah, the virtual one too now, overwhelmingly, right?
Yeah.
How do we design that virtual space, right? Normally humans were used to just being in a physical space. Now we're in 2 spaces often at the same time. I'm in a Zoom space with you right now, but I'm also in my own home office, as are you.
Okay. Yeah. And let's just talk about COVID for a second. And you mentioned earlier on that you just saw this kind of being exacerbated by COVID. What have you observed? What have been the issues around what you have observed? And how do we actually remedy those?
So what I observed in myself was a fear of missing out, especially at the beginning, extreme FOMO in terms of all of my conferences and travel had been canceled. So I tried to get on every online conference I could. I didn't want to miss a Zoom meeting with anybody. So at the beginning, and this is March 2020, those first 2 months, I started to be on Zoom or on my screen at least 8 to 10 hours a day. I had never done that before in my life, ever to that extent. And my brain was exhausted. And I started to research, why is my brain exhausted? And it's because we cannot, when we look at a Zoom screen, especially if we're in gallery view and there are more than 3 people there, often I was in sessions with 8, 16, sometimes 100 people. The eyes are darting around that gallery view and don't know where to focus, and the brain just gets exhausted. So one-on-one, not so bad, right? Here, I'm just looking at you, it's one face. Yeah. I'm not getting exhausted by having this conversation on Zoom with you versus in person, but I'm also not getting energy from you in the sense that we're not in the same physical space together. Because there's something energizing body-to-body communication that happens when we're in a room with one person or 100 people. We get energy from that. Yeah. And that is also significantly decreased on a Zoom. So I noticed that fatigue, and especially brain fatigue, almost like brain fog, as though I hadn't slept properly, right? And I just got on in a rabbit hole of research on all these dimensions, and, you know, incorporating sort of what I had learned my whole life about technology implementation and workforce design and all of those things, those variants of consulting that I'd been involved in, that led me to this conclusion that there are these 5 things that we can influence as a leader in a corporation about how we design work that really enables harnessing attention.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's interesting talking about that, because I was talking to somebody earlier on today who's in a large organization, and they were talking about this kind of just being somewhat exhausted by the kind of the continuous Zoom or WebEx or whatever it might be, but also that the work seems to have expanded in terms of kind of, you know, that there isn't that kind of, well, you know, I will leave at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock and I will get the train home or whatever. So the work has expanded into that. How do we then go about, because you're talking about, you know, how we design work. How do we design work that, you know, is appropriate for optimizing the attention? Because I hear a lot of people say, oh yes, we're doing all we can for the well-being of our staff. I hear them say that, but then I also see and observe that the expectations are intense. So there's a little bit of a conflict.
So I believe that we can focus better, or harness our attention, develop attention, as in your words, better, if we are aligned on purpose. If we understand what value creation means for our clients and for ourselves in the context of the work that we're doing. And there's value creation defined by the company, defined by the team, defined to an extent by the job role that we're in, and defined to an extent by our own selves as human beings. And if we can have a conversation in a team about that and understand what is value creation for this team, how is it aligned with value creation for the company's mission, and how is that aligned for value creation for the benefit of the world? And then I have this exercise called the value creation portfolio, which simply comes from the innovation portfolio. I used to do innovation portfolio management, and it's the same concept, or it's the same concept as portfolio management for a stock portfolio. Look at the balance of your portfolio in your current state and understand how much time am I actually spending on those activities that really create value, that create a new asset, that create new knowledge, that solve a real problem for a client, that give me new learning, right? However you're defining value. And look at your current state of your work pie, be that 40 hours or 60 hours a week or whatever you're working, and understand that balance, and then look at it. And most people do this exercise and are like, oh my goodness, I can't believe I'm only spending 20% of my week on value creation activities, and the rest of it is lost in meetings, emails, rabbit holes of other systems that I'm in, or instant messaging on Slack, etc. And the shock. So the starting point is right there. How do we shift the balance of the portfolio such that we can do more value creation work, and then everything else flows from
this is assessed through the test that you have.
So the scorecard that you did the Focus Better scorecard,
which I was horrified when I saw my results, right?
So your results, and you have given me permission to share your results. You answered 20 questions, or it's really 14 questions, or 15 questions, I believe, 3 questions per element that influences our attention. And your score was 50%, but you score higher than most people. So most people score 40% or below. So take that into account, because the world is suffering now from this problem. This is a very common problem.
That only makes me feel a tiny bit better. And that only makes me feel a tiny bit better, but not an awful lot better, because it's still an awful score, isn't it?
But John, when you did this, what surprised you while you were doing it? Did you have an idea before you saw the score? So which questions, if you remember any of them, or which topic sort of puzzled you, or you were like, oh my goodness?
I think it was around the value-based work that I found really interesting.
Yeah, so that's in the focus area, of course, because that's where we start. But I'll tell you, you scored highest on environment. So, and which means you have designed your physical and your virtual workspaces to harness attention. You got a 75 out of 100% in that area. Your lowest score was balance. So you scored 0. So there are 5, there are 5 questions related to balance there. And, you know, one of them is about, do you use experiential learning with your teams or with yourself, or reflective practice? Does your brain have too many tabs open? You must have answered yes, because that would give you a score of 0. So it's interesting that the balance, this is the trend, that people have an awareness of their relationship with their tools. They have a good handle on if their environment is difficult for attention management or not. They understand focus being the skill. So you got a 100% on focus. Actually, that was your highest score. So, which means you are fully aligned on purpose, and you understand your value creation activities. But balance is always the weakest. And I think this is the new realization that, as I mentioned before, if you look at a person as a whole being with a body and a head, what's bigger, the body or the head?
It sounds like a trick question, isn't it? Because I think the answer is actually the head, isn't it?
The body's bigger.
Oh, the body, yeah, okay, but there's something about the head.
So it's
and the
not
body.
A trick question.
Yeah,
it's not a trick question.
Okay.
But you are right in asking that, because we place, as human beings in the knowledge worker economy in particular, we place more emphasis on the head. And it's as though our head is much bigger than our body. So we place more value on analysis paralysis, on head in screens. That's how we behave, right? Whether we kind of want to or not, we're doing it, including me, right? Head in screen. And our head has become bigger than our body. So we're losing this ability to have well-being, have rest, tap into wisdom instead of just relying on intelligence. And innovation is suffering, mental health is suffering.
And because you mentioned innovation earlier on, and I was just in the context of when you were saying that one of the things in the world that we exist in now, where it's so much virtual, is that we're missing the kind of the physical contact and being in the same room. And just you were saying that, it just struck me that, you know, one of the things that you know, if you're doing something creative, if you're doing, you know, really trying to be creative, ideation, all of this sort of stuff, that it's harder to do that virtually, isn't it? That there's something about being in the room with people that you kind of bounce off and feed off each other. So that's a serious issue. If we're right in that, that's a serious issue for organizations, isn't it?
I believe it's a serious issue. And in addition to just being in the same room, if we are doing less movement with our bodies, if we are not ever handwriting in a journal, we're just typing, we're affecting the brain and its ability to innovate and be creative differently. If we are not using play, right? You know, there's so much hype, especially before COVID, so much hype around innovation tools being tactile tools. So when you look at the empathy toy, for example, or the failure toy, these are tools corporations are using to develop skills of empathy and how to fail fast in teams. And they are toys, they are tactile toys. People are using art for collaboration, and that's all being lost. So in addition to just this energy and ability to collaborate in a physical space better than we do in a virtual space, if we're on Zoom all the time, we're also losing all these tactile methods to tap into wisdom and innovation and even reflection, right? How often do we reflect when we're in a Zoom? How often do we pause and say, okay, let's journal in silence for 5 minutes on that?
Yeah. You know,
Yeah, we
somebody's going
don't
off
do
and
it, right?
they're
So
going
we're
to do
losing.
they're going to go off and do their emails. So
Yeah.
if we talk all about that, Michelle, and this is just a fascinating subject. I mean, I suppose one question that's in my head is, how do we design the work to get that balance if that's really what we're trying to do?
So I think it's a holistic process, right? So the reason I've defined these 5 elements that influence attention is because they're all equally important. I think the world is scoring the lowest on balance, but that's not to negate the importance of the other 5. So if we train our teams on how to focus being a skill, and if we understand that value creation portfolio, we're going to do a good job on being able to focus or concentrate on those things that we need to do to sustain value and market advantage. Number 2, if we design our work culture to enable time for deep work, as Cal Newport puts it, right? Deep work being, for a knowledge worker, work that creates something that's hard to replicate or develops a new skill, and that requires focus. And if we can structure the work day or the work week to enable our team members to have time for deep work that's not at night or on weekends, we are creating a culture that respects deep work needs to be done to create value. One of the big things my clients are facing, all of them right now, is instant response, the behavior around instant response. And I call that a cultural facet, right? If we can allow or define when is something an emergency, when is instant response really required in an internal employee to employee communication, and when is it required with the client? Because instant response with a client, I would argue, is also not always mandatory. So that's a big one, designing for what's our agreed upon behavior on instant response. So that's a facet of culture, and culture is a big thing.
That's a huge one.
Yeah. And then, go ahead.
So if a leader, in a large organization, a leader in any organization, but a leader in a large organization, or somebody whether it's in a large corporate, or whether it is, you're driving your own business, listening to this and kind of saying, okay, this is something that I need to do something about. What are the things that you would be saying to him or her to actually say, okay, this is where you start, this is where you go with this is how you do something about this to make it a better environment, to actually really, harness the attention of your people?
Understand your current state. So even doing this mini scorecard that you did, but I also have an attention audit that is a 50-question survey that allows a whole team to understand where they are at an individual basis, and then where they are collectively, and then to create action items around the weak areas to make a change in these 5 design areas. And some are really quick fixes. So tools and environment are really the easiest things to fix, because you can see them, they're tangible. Yeah. And these simple things, just do those 10 recommendations on on putting your phone in another room, turning off all notifications. We've all heard of these. They're simple 10 steps that you can do to take back control, become the master of your tools, your tech tools. That's the starting point. Understand the current state, and then start with that value creation portfolio. Understand for yourself as a leader, what is your value creation portfolio? Share it with your team. Say, this is my current state. This is what it looks like. This is how I want to change. Let's now do this as a team and on a per role basis and see where we are. And it's really a collective project. It's not something a leader is going to be able to tell a team to do. It is an absolutely collective exercise to help harness attention for this collective body, this corpus, this corporation, right? And it's going to be co-created, the action items related to the current state.
What's going through my head as well as you're talking is that, yes, we're talking about technology, and we're talking about how technology can impact negatively. I'm sure, because there are technology tools that impact positively. How do we find, and this is probably asking an impossible question, but how do we try and find the balance with technology?
So it depends on the job role. That's number one. It depends on our job role. And what makes the tech balance issue so difficult compared to cigarette addiction or sugar addiction, for example, because it's being equated, this problem, is being equated to be that it's going to become as big as cigarette and sugar addiction.
Yeah, absolutely. Right? Yeah.
And we can get rid of cigarettes. We can't get rid of tech. We can almost get rid of sugar if we really want to, but we can't get rid of tech. And so if we look, for example, at our team and we agree, okay, these are the tools and these are the platforms that we absolutely must be in. These are mission critical tools. And let's just define those. And some scientists say, there's a book called When Your Happiness Was Hacked that says beyond email and industry tools, you only need 3 tools to do your work. And I think for every organization that's going to be different, but can they define the mission critical applications that they need to be in and then look at, okay, what else are we in? And do we really need all of that? And that's part of the tool strategy. That's that approach to what is the digital portfolio that our company needs, that our team needs, and that an individual needs based on their role. And how do we enable leaving the rest of it aside so there's less to log into?
One of the things that strikes me is that with the work you're doing, and I love what you're doing with it because I just find it absolutely fascinating. But and I'm just imagining in my head you talking to some CEO of an organization to say that this is work that really needs to be done in the organization, and I've no doubt that that's true. How do you try and demonstrate that one of the reasons to do it is around market advantage?
So the easy way to do it is to measure the time wasted. So in this attention audit, the teams answer the question, how much time do you believe you're losing per week due to multitasking and distractions? So a number will get put in there. This is not scientific, but it'll crank out a number. Then the CEO or whoever's running this project on the client side will give me a number of the average hourly cost of this team, the average hourly salary. You plug in that number and they immediately see if this is even remotely correct, this assessment, and people tend to underestimate by a half how much time they're losing. The minimum amount I've had a team, and so the attention audits are going on now, and I've had 10 go through this. The minimum amount of loss per year has been $500,000, the minimum amount for a 10-member team. Imagine a larger team or doing this for a whole company. So the financial business case becomes pretty clear quickly, and that is quite compelling.
That doesn't surprise me.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a big number, but it actually doesn't surprise me.
The average in North America that's published by Inc. magazine, and this is a 2-year-old data, is 22 hours a week is the average amount of time the North American worker loses to distractions.
Yeah, that's kind of scary, isn't it? That really is scary. Michelle, I have taken up more of your time than I said I would, and I'm apologizing for that, but it's been absolutely fascinating to listen to you, and I would love to have you come back and explore this a little bit more if you are up for that, because I would love to have another conversation about it.
It would be my pleasure.
Before we wrap up, a couple of things I ask everybody. A book that has had an impact upon you that you would recommend to others?
So the book, I'm in the middle of it because it's like 800 pages long. It's called The Master and His Emissary by Ian McGilchrist. And this is a book that is half brain science and half analysis of human culture. And the premise, what got me so interested in this book, is he talks about left brain, right brain, the divided brain, and that because of the way our society, our culture as humans has developed since the Industrial Revolution, or since the Renaissance actually, is that we are now becoming left brain dominant, i.e. we are thinking more than we are feeling or tapping into wisdom. So he really validated this point that I knew about, that there's this imbalance between intelligence and wisdom. And he goes through a 800-page, an 800-page discussion, well researched, on the danger that we're going to let the left brain and / the tools become our masters and lose our humanity and our ability to tap into wisdom.
That's definitely one I would add to, not one I've come across before. So that is definitely one I would add to the list of books, because that sounds fascinating.
It's brilliant.
Yeah, that sounds absolutely fascinating. The other question that I ask everybody, because I'm curious, or otherwise called nosy, is daily rituals. If you have them, what they are and how they serve you.
Yes. So my daily ritual, the most prominent and long-lasting one, is a movement practice. And what does that mean? That means in summertime in Canada, my movement practice tends to be swimming, kayaking, walking outside, or being in nature. But at all other times when there's bad weather, my movement practice is a mindful yoga practice. And a reflective practice. I also meditate regularly in the months, really starting here in September through to May, basically, is when my meditation practice gets a bit more regular.
And how do they serve you? What do you actually get from those practices?
Insight.
Insight,
and well-being.
Yeah.
Physical well-being and insight, and my brain rests.
Yeah, I mean, I must say that I've been meditating now for quite a number of years, and I would always say that I think I'm a pretty poor meditator, because I find it very hard to keep my mind still. But then people say to me, "Don't bother, don't get worried about that." But the fact that you actually do it, I find it does actually give you, I think it just gives you tools to manage. And that's the one thing I would say. So I can understand what you say about insight. Michelle, where can people reach you? We put everything in the notes, but where can they get in touch with you?
Sure. So if you're interested in taking this focus scorecard, this brief survey to see where you are in terms of attention management, go to MindEQuity.ca. That's CA for Canada. And the word is MindEQuity.ca. And you can find everything there, all the links, and I'm on LinkedIn and Twitter as well.
And they can do the test.
And they can do the test.
Yeah. Michelle, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. It's been a real joy. I really enjoyed it, and I'd love us to come back and do another one.
Will do. Thank you, John.
Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.